Hello and welcome to another episode of It Came From The Page. And today we are doing fall recommendations. And I know you're like, wow, you've never done a fall recommendations video or any other season recommendation video. Why are you doing this? Because, I have terrible taste. Nobody wants to hear me talk about things that are like, I recommend you read this, because they'll read it, they'll be like, wow, this sucked. And I'll be like, well, it's your fault, you listen to me. But no, I'm doing this because there is a cool readathon, watchathon, activity-a-thon coming up called Halloweenathon. What do you think it's about? It's about No, it's about Halloween. So Halloweenathon is a thing spearheaded by the wonderful Kelsey from Simon Slashers, and she's got a whole bunch of people together to talk about their love of Halloween and to get people pumped for the season. So I thought, hey, I'll do a thing where I recommend fall novels so that you can get into it. Now, these novels don't all get set at fall. What do I consider a fall thing versus a summer thing versus a winter thing? Well, I guess, they're different seasons, so I guess you can do that. But mostly for me, there are very kind of specific elements that I think something needs to have in order to be something that is, to me, feels like a really good read for the fall. And you'll kind of get the idea of what I'm going for as we go through this. There's a lot of kind of a seasonal specific things, but also things that just kind of feel like they're celebrating old school Halloween-y monsters. So we're kind of just going to get into this. These are no order. These are just fun recommendations. That's all they are. They're recommendations. That's all. The first one is going to be episode 13 by Greg DeLuey. These first two are going to be ones that a lot of people have read, so it's I'm not going to go into them too far, but this is going for your classic ghost tale. And it's just a really fun book. It's just a really fun book that has a really good set of characters. Really would recommend going audio for this one, as there is a wonderfully produced audiobook, and it's all about these people who are going to this house. They are all part of a relatively famous ghost show that is trying to get a big story for their final episode of the season in order to get renewed. So they're all going to something that they think is going to actually be haunted and going to be a big experience for them. And I just thought the characters were great in this, and some of the areas and elements that it goes into are really interesting. I thought this was just a really good classic-y ghost tale. And I like all the characters, and, I had a good time with it. So, episode 13 by Craig DeLuey. Next one, another one that people have all heard about before, and that's Mayfly, bitch. Mayfly. This is a serial killer book about a serial killer in Los Angeles. So, she's got competition, because I'm sure that's most people in Los Angeles. This is a really fun book that has a really big focus on the Halloween-y spirit. You're following this character as she kind of descends into madness a little bit and commits some acts that are very abhorrent, and she's kind of losing touch with reality as the book goes on a little bit. There is a lot of more deeper literary things going on here. Now, I don't have all of the experiences to completely encapsulate what all brands of storytelling are being utilized here, because I feel like the story, the way it's told, changes as you go throughout it. There'll be a kind of an introduction that is kind of introducing the new style as we go through the book. So, I'm not as well read on a lot of the more literary side of things, but even without that element, you can really just get a sheer love of Halloween in this book. And I think that's one of the reasons why it really is a great fall read. And I just had a wonderful time with it. So even if you don't have the research, this book rocks either way. Next up is The Witchstone. This is a kind of relatively new novel. And this is kind of a little bit more in the comedic side of things, but it does have a lot of really cool and fun demons and a version of hell that's really interesting. So this is a book that is all about this kind of fail son of a very famous demon lord who he's gotten this job as like in charge of various curses in hell. And he has just been kind of like breezing through this. Hasn't really been trying. He's just like, he lives his life and he barely does his job. He doesn't really care. He's just kind of like a minor con man. And there's a new boss that comes in, and the new boss is basically like, we're going to crucible you, which is what it's called when they like basically dissolve them back into the primordial ooze, unless you can like give me some actual human suffering. So he actually has to go and do the work of finding out who has his curse, and he has to set up the thing where he's going to set it up like they are almost going to break the curse. He's going to help this family as they go through, they travel the world, and they have only a little bit of time left to fully kind of like solve the curse of their family. And he is a kind of a con man, and you're not really sure where he's going to land at the end of this book. And I think what makes this book really well done is that he is kind of laissez-faire and is kind of like a little bit like a glib character, but there is the real human element of the people who have this curse, and the curse is kind of like outlined in a very interesting way that really takes the curse seriously, and it makes it so that you are really kind of rooting for these characters, and yet you kind of also like this fail son demon, this nepo baby, and you're like, damn, like this is, and it's a really fun adventure story, but there's also really good character work in this. There's so many cool monsters. It has an awesome finale. There's all these like ins and outs. If you're a person who's a fan of demons, like you would definitely have a great time with this. And yeah, it's funny and it's sad and it's just a really good full book for the season. Next up is a few non-fiction books. Wow, you're so classy. You're reading books that aren't real. Wow. Wait, sorry. You're reading books that are real. Whatever, I'm not classy. So these are two books that I think are like really good to kind of like set up the season. And the first one is called American Monsters, and this is a series of stories that are real life encounters with various cryptids and monsters. And there is this woman who goes around and she takes this stuff very seriously, where she'll sit down, she'll take the person's story and she'll kind of write it out and write out their experiences and what they think they saw and what cryptids are in most areas of the United States. Now, whether or not you believe these, it's up to you. That's up to you. You could choose whether or not you think these are real encounters, or you think some of them are kind of fictionalized, or you think maybe there's some other thing going on with what they experienced. But it is very fun to just listen to a bunch of cryptid encounter stories, and American Monsters is one of the best of those. And this author, Linda S. Godfrey, has a ton of these books, so if you listen to one and you enjoy it, there's a whole bunch more to just kind of listen to, and they're all of these very interesting tales of people who have seen the strange and unusual. And obviously it's focusing on America. I mean, I'm Canadian, so I'm like, let's get out of this America, most of you monsters. But no, it's just focused on America, so whatevs. Next up, the other nonfiction book is A Dream of Dracula. This is just a really well done, really interesting dissection of the character of Dracula. This is a nonfiction book. A lot of it seems to be very personal essays. There is a lot about what it's like to know that you are going to die here. There are actually some really hard-hitting interviews with people who are about to pass away. There are interviews with people who think that they are vampires. Again, are they vampires? That's up to you. He interviews a college student who drinks blood and like lives a very vampiric lifestyle. And then he also talks a lot about just the history of folkloric vampires. He has some very interesting comparisons to Dracula. He gets a lot into the Guy de Rez story, which this book is written in the 70s. So how people talk about the Guy de Rez story now is different than they did then, but it's still a very interesting tale to read about and to get the insight of Leonard Woolf in regards to this book. So I just think that this is like a really good exploration of, the American obsession with Dracula and the worldwide sensation of vampires. Next up, one that has no highfalutenness to it, is The Haunted Forest Tour by James A. Moore. This is just a wild bonkers book where there's every conceivable creature that you have ever seen, and it all goes wild and cray-cray. Basically, what happens is a magical forest opens up in rural America, and a business comes in and offers tram tours of the haunted forest. So they're literally a haunted forest tour. So literally they Jurassic Park a giant random forest that has just come up and is filled with all types of monsters, like nearly every monster you can think of, and a lot of them are really weird, and like, you know, something goes wrong Halloween night, and then there's so many carnage and everything's going wild, and it's just such a fun time from start to finish. So many good monsters, such a good setting, such a fun idea that I just had a blast with it. Next up is a slasher, shlooshy shlooshy shlooshy. That's what slashers do, they shlooshy sloosh. This is Halloween Slaughter by Sergio Gomez. I love this book. This is a sequel to Camp Slaughter. Of the entire Slaughter trilogy, this is my favorite by far, and this is still my favorite slasher book ever written, mainly because it really focuses on letting you love these characters, and you really, really get to know this cast of characters. You really kind of like understand the tragedy inherent in a lot of slashers, which is the idea of, the young getting cut off at their prime and never being able to be who they really could be. And they all have hopes and dreams, and they all have very good characterization, and it's of course very Halloween-y because of the title. And yeah, I just thought this was a very impactful, meaningful, one of those books that you just couldn't put down. I could not put this one down. I read it pretty quick, and it's a pretty big book, so it is really worth reading. Now, this is a sequel to Camp Slaughter, so you probably should read that book first. I know some people don't like Camp Slaughter. Even if you've read Camp Slaughter and you're kind of mixed on Camp Slaughter, I would still say go into Halloween Slaughter because it's so good. It's really, really good. I do not think you will be disappointed. This is a little bit of a slower burn slasher. Just be aware, you ain't getting a slash every 5 pages. Be patient, bitch. Next up is A Night in Lonesome October. In the Lonesome October. This is just a really fun book that is just, you can choose to read. At first I was reading this like day by day, and you learn a little bit more about what's going on in the story as you go. All you really need to know about this is there are a ton of various Halloween-y-esque characters, both famous characters from literature and also just, creatures and ghoulies and witches and warlocks and all of those things. And they have a mission that they are trying to complete by Halloween night. And you kind of get the idea that there's some kind of a ritual going on, and the outcome of the ritual will be very important to all of reality. But this is mainly kind of like, it feels kind of cozy, because mainly this is about, which is weird, because I'm about to tell you, like, the main character is kind of Jack the Ripper, and he's got a dog, and it's basically him and the dog kind of like hanging out. And you get most of the book from the dog's perspective. And I don't know, it's a really kind of a quaint book that does have some weight to it, but it is also kind of a little bit slower burn, really kind of like embraces the season, kind of really makes you feel like you are experiencing the joy of October. And yeah, I was at first reading this day by day, but then I got hooked and I read it all last year, and I had a great time with it. So this is definitely a recommend. Now, another book that is a recommendation, and obviously it's a recommendation. It's like everyone and their mom is going to recommend this, which is good, because it's a great book. But I would say Autumn Crow by Catherine Cheney. Oh, the Halloween gods! They've come, they've delivered a pumpkin, and it's Autumn Crow! This is a short story collection, and there's also a book called Autumn Crow Fresh Hail, which is the first kind of like a novel in this setting. This is about a town where it's Halloween all the time, and you're like, wow, that sounds great, and it is kind of great, but there's also like real weight to the stories. Like, this is not just nostalgia, there is a little bit more to it than that. I really like this short story collection. There are certain stories in the collection that I just found really, really impactful and interesting and unique. and you think about them a lot. And I think one of the joys of the Halloween season is really getting into a good short story collection, and there are a few that are as good or as Halloweeny as Autumn Crow. Brrr, go to the town of Autumn Crow. You may not come back alive, bitch. Next up, I'm going more short story collections. I know, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to some corny people who might be watching this, but this one of Stephen King, I know, don't get mad at me. This is Stephen King's Night Shift. Now, I chose Night Shift because it's by far his best short story collection. If you've read something like Skeleton Crew, there are some stinkers in Skeleton Crew. There are some great stories in Skeleton Crew, and there are some stinkers in Skeleton Crew. And then if you've read something like, oh God, Nightmares and Dreamscapes, there are some stories that are cool, and there are others which are just listen to him talk about his child's little league game for like 3 hours, which I know some people love, which is fine. But if you're anyways, if it's Nightmares and Dreamscapes, what's the dream? The American dream? I don't care. But Night Shift is just a really solid, amazing short story collection, and it's important to read in its totality because it really defined a lot of 80s pop culture. A lot of pop culture and a lot of the very famous Stephen King movies are all kind of adapted from this collection, and a lot of very famous people got their start from adapting versions of these stories. Now, keep in mind, this is the very early Stephen King. So, because of that, it's problematic. There's some problematic elements to this. This is very much like early King, where he's kind of like angry. He's really writing with a purpose. He's really writing his own experiences. And his own experiences, there are some stuff in here that I just think do not hold up in the modern day, especially if you're going to read something like Trucks. There's some really bad people of color. Like, the way people of color are written in this collection is not good, which is, bad. So just go in knowing that, this is a 70s book, and it has some very problematic elements in it. But I do also think that there are some stories in here, like The Woman in the Room, and so many more. I really like Night Shift, which was made into a great movie, Chose Over. And I think that this is just a really solid collection with some really great hits. It also doesn't have a full audiobook, which I will never understand. Almost all of Stephen King's work have full audiobooks. This one doesn't. Various stories have been collected, and there is audio versions of some of the stories, but there is not a start-to-finish audiobook of just the Night Shift collection, which is bonkers. Because, this is a story... collection of short stories that pretty much defined the 80s and is really why people called King the King of Horror for so long. It really is the stuff that he's written in here. This is raw, this is angry, and because of that, it's a little bit problematic occasionally. My last short story collection that I'm going to say, and this is more of a general, kind of a plea for short story collections, for you as a reader. Pick up a short story collection that you have never read before, that you've never seen anyone talk about before, and you can't find many people talking about it online. In the horror genre, there are tons of these. Go to thrift books, go to Amazon, just look up a short story collection that doesn't have many views and that looks interesting to you and read it. Because I'm recommending the book Shadows 2, which is the Charles L. Grant anthology, and because that is what really kind of brought me to this revelation. Because I read it, there are some stories here that are very esoteric and are very much not fully easy to understand, and I found the fact that I didn't have anywhere to go, I just had to sit with those stories and actually think about them myself, was a really interesting experience. Because and this is one of the great things about online and the way the World Wide Web is, if you read any story now, you watch any confusing movie, you can go and see many people's interpretations and discussions, and those are all extremely valuable. This is not to devalue that situation, but every once in a while it is really rewarding as a reader to sit down with a book that you do not know anything about. you don't know what the story entails. If you look up the authors, you can't even know anything about the authors. Oftentimes, the only things you get is what's in the actual short story collection. A lot of times, especially back in the 80s, this might have been the only short story a lot of these people wrote or read or had published. And yeah, Shadows 2 was just an amazing experience from that point of view. There are some amazing stories in this collection. If you're just going to pick up the collection itself, PD by T.D. Klein is an amazing story. It's one of the best short stories I've ever read, and it's so weird and so out there. And that's one that you can find a little bit more of a discussion about, where people are kind of like talking about their interpretations and stuff like that, and that's value. But there's so many other stories in this collection that I had nowhere to go but my own brain, so I just kind of read a story and then just kind of sat for a while and thought, what does that mean? And that is a valuable experience. Next up, we have Venom, Enemy Within. This is a comic book series. There are 3 comic books in here, and this is where I get a little bit unhinged, because this is this is like 90s trash comics, but in the best way. So Venom, the guy with the big teeth and the long tongue. So he's living in San Francisco. He's swinging around on Halloween. He's having a great time. It's Halloween. Oh, look at all these characters and all those costumes. He stops some dudes trying to rough up some youngins. And he's like, oh yeah, I got this cool costume. Everything is cool. It's very Halloween-y. And then all of a sudden goblins show up. He's going on the train. He's going home. He's got a long day. He's like, oh, I'm out of Halloween. I'm Halloweened out. He's going on the train. All of a sudden, bam, there's goblins. And you're like, what? And there's like a ton of goblins. And they all look really cool. And he's just like fighting goblins. He's like, oh, there's so many damn goblins. I'm trying to fight these goblins. Blah, 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 blah. And the goblins are just going, they're like little dudes. Like, and then, he's like fighting him. He goes to this like little, he's on the train. He gets off the train. He's running through the subway tunnels, and he encounters the lair of the goblins. And the goblins, they're trying to summon their king. So the first time they try it, who do they get? They get Morbius. It's Morbin time. And I know pop culture Morbius now sucks, because he was played by Jared Leto, and it was bad. That movie was bad. Everyone knew it was bad. But the actual character of Morbius is fun. He's like a vampire. He's a very 90s vampire. He's got giant teeth. And he's like, I am a doctor and I'm fancy, but I'm also going to suck your blood. And he's fun. He's a doctor. He's a... But like he shows up and the goblins are like, oh, this is not who we're trying to get. And then they do it again. And then the goblins all of a sudden, bam, it's Demo Goblin. And you might be like, what the fuck is Demo Goblin? Well, that's Hobgoblin. And you might be like, who's Hobgoblin? Well, Hobgoblin was the sequel to Green Goblin. And then you might be like, who's Green Goblin? And like Green Goblin is the arch nemesis of Spider-Man. So in the 80s, there was another version of him. And it was, instead of being green, he was orange. But instead of calling him the Orange Goblin, he was the Hobgoblin. But then there was that Hobgoblin, and then Hobgoblin went away, and then the second Hobgoblin showed up, and he was Jason McIndale, and then Jason McIndale might have done a little bit of selling his soul to Satan, and then he became Demo Goblin. It's simple. Comics are simple. There's nothing complicated about them. They are very simple. So this is just a goblin with big old teeth, and he's got like fiery thing, and he is always like, I will kill the blasphemers. And this is a 3-issue comic series that just goes wild places, and it's just so much fun. Very silly. Very 90s comic. And at one point, Demo Goblins is giant. He's giant. He's like the king of these goblins. Goblins are rampaging throughout San Francisco. Oh man, it's a great time. Anyways, enough about Venom, Morbius, and the Hobgoblins. Demo Goblins in this case. There's more books to talk about. We only have 3 left. So I'm going to talk about The Return of the Wolfman by Jeff Rovin. Now this is a book that if you're like, how do I read this book, Andrew? I will tell you, you gotta go to archive.org unless you're a billionaire, because these books go for stupid money. But this was released by Dark Horse Press as a solo universal horror book. Now, Jeff Rovin is a great author. I really like Jeff Rovin. I think he's really, really a solid writer. And this is a book that really captures the spirit of old Universal monsters. And I think Universal Monsters is one of the tenets of Halloween. And this book does what seems to be impossible, which is it writes a serious sequel to Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. So Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein happens. This is a direct sequel to Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, but it's a very serious horror novel. And I mean, it's pulpy. It's pulpy because it's a pulpy story. And you're just like, what? So, that alone is, a really impressive thing that Jeff Roven has done. But also, this is just a blast. This book is so much fun. It's so much fun to read. There's all kinds of, mayhem and madness and, you get Dracula showing up, you get Frankenstein's monster showing up. There's all these hints to other very famous universal creatures out there. And it's you really get a, Wolfman versus Dracula is the big conflict here. And it's very Bela Lugosi Dracula. And yeah, it's very fun. It's very fun. And it goes into some wild places. And I just had a blast with it. Really one of the biggest surprises I've had recently. If you have yourself a physical copy of this, I'm jealous, for I never do, and I never will. Next up is a Warhammer fantasy horror tale, and you're like, oh no, Andrew's talking Warhammer again. And I'm like, whatever, well, this is Gothal Hollow. This is a wonderful book, and I love it. And it is it's kind of like a contained story. I went into this not knowing anything about Warhammer Fantasy, and you don't need to know anything going in this book. So Warhammer and Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer Age of Sigmar, these are big, sprawling, giant universes where, it feels like you gotta study and understand a lot to get into them. This book, you can just pop in. This is just if you've never read any Warhammer stuff, you can just pop this up. So Gothal Hollow is the story about this family who's got this big giant Gothic castle, and they have been kind of haunted by this beast that's roaming the countryside, and it seems to very specifically have a problem with this specific family. And it's a really, really great Gothic tale. To me, this felt like an awesome Hammer horror book. If you don't know Hammer, so Hammer was a studio back in the 70s and 60s, and also some in the 50s, that did these lavish productions, very British productions of Frankenstein, Wolfman, Dracula, all those things. That's where Peter Cushing comes from. That's where Christopher Lee came from. They all kind of came from that stable of Hammer House of Horrors. And those Hammer films are actually very important to pop culture, but that's entirely a different point entirely. But I love the feel of those movies and the settings and the characters and how they kind of explore this kind of rural haunted nature. And I really felt that here. I think that Anna Stevens really captures the vibe of a great Hammer horror film, and you really love all the characters in this, and there's just a really great plot, and it's some really cool scenarios and situations, and it's really fun. It's just a really fun, solid, great novel, and I would really highly recommend it. Very much it felt like it was kind of a werewolf-esque story, but there's way more going on. But at the start, you really get cool werewolf vibes, so go for that, because there's a mysterious beast, and it's wonderful, and I really am eagerly anticipating more from this series, and I hope that happens. My final recommendation, but also my actual number one. This is the most Halloween-y book in my opinion, and that's Ushers Passing, Past These Ushers, which is by Robert R. McCammon. McCammy, whoa! He has come from the sky to bless us with stuff. This book. So this book obviously is taking a lot from Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. But this feels like it really kind of goes off in its own direction. This book has some really beautiful descriptions of fall, and there is this setting of there's like this cursed family, and there's like some mysterious thing going on in their past, and unless they are at the family estate and the family home, they will kind of deteriorate and not be able to live a good life. And you kind of slowly unravel what is going on in this family. Why is the family cursed? Who got them this cursed? And it's fun because, this is very clearly, the Poe story in the universe of this is based off of the family. So he kind of like stole little bits about the family and then wrote The Fall of House of Usher. And then this is kind of like a story about the actual fall of the House of Usher, which kind of happens in the 80s. And it's just really fun. A lot of the covers are like ultimate Halloween-y goodness. Really fun book to read and enjoy. And the ways that Robert McCammon describes fall is just outstanding. The way that the story kind of like unravels is really good. I'm not I feel like the ending to this book kind of wraps up pretty quickly, but other than that, it's just a really kind of interesting story. There's some great performances on the audiobook with some great accent work. You're like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. And I don't know, I think this is probably still I think Boy's Life is probably my favorite McCammon, but this is up there with my favorite Robert Adam McCammon stories. So what have you been reading to get into fall? What recommendations do you have? I would love to know below. Goodbye.